The habit, what nobody told you. Opener. This is not about building better habits. This is not about discipline or willpower or becoming 1% better every day. This is about something most people carry in silence. The thing you keep doing even when you know it costs you. The pattern you have tried to stop more than once, more than you would like to admit, and the question you have never quite found a good answer to. Not how do I stop, but why can I not stop? Part 1. The habit. You cannot explain. You know the one. You do not need me to name it. It is already there, somewhere in the back of your mind. The moment someone mentions habits or patterns, or the things we do that we wish we did not, it might look small from the outside. Something you reach for at the end of a long day. Something you do when things get too quiet. Something that started as relief and somewhere along the way became something you cannot quite get around. You have told yourself you will stop. You have stopped for a while, and then it came back. Not because you are weak, because something brought it back. There is a particular kind of shame that comes with a habit you cannot shake. It is not the loud shame of a mistake you made once. It is quieter and more persistent, the kind that says you know better. You have known better for a long time, and you are still doing it. That shame is heavy, and the heavier it gets, the more it does what shame always does. It turns inward. It becomes a story about who you are, not about what you do. Not I have this pattern, but I am someone who cannot stop. That is the version of the story that is the least true and the most damaging. Nobody ever explained to you that a habit which feels impossible to break is rarely about willpower. Nobody told you that the patterns which stay the longest are usually the ones that once did something important, that protected something, that made something bearable that otherwise would not have been. Nobody gave you a language for the difference between a bad choice and a learned response, between something you chose and something your nervous system learned to reach for, because it was the only thing that worked. That difference matters more than most people know. If you have ever known something was costing you and done it anyway, stay with this. Part 2. Where it came from. Whatever this pattern is for you, it started as a solution. Not one you would have chosen if everything had been different, but a solution to something real, a way of managing what was too much, a way of getting through what felt impossible, a way of giving yourself one moment of relief in a life that had been asking more of you than it was giving back. That is not weakness. That is intelligence. That is the mind designed to do, finding what works and returning to it. The problem is not that you found something that worked. The problem is that the thing that made it necessary never went away. Look at what was around you when this pattern started, not to assign blame, just as an honest look at the conditions. Maybe it was a period of relentless pressure, when the demands never stopped and rest felt like something you had not earned yet. Maybe it was a dynamic where you were expected to give more than you received, where your needs were consistently secondary. Maybe it was an environment that never gave you a safe place to feel what you were actually feeling. So you learned to redirect it, to contain it in a way that made life possible. The pattern did not come from nowhere. It was a response to something real. Here is something that is rarely said. The patterns that are hardest to stop are often the ones that kept you loyal to something, to a version of yourself that was holding it together, to a relationship that needed you to function, to a system that depended on you not falling apart. You did not develop this pattern out of selfishness or carelessness. You developed it because something in your life required you to keep going. And this was how you kept going. What you call a bad habit. The system that built it called loyalty. That reframe does not make the pattern harmless, but it changes what you think it says about you. The thing you keep doing was once the only thing that helped. That is not nothing. Part 3. What the system asked. Think about what the system around you actually asked of you, not what it said it was asking, what it actually required. To be available when called, regardless of what you were carrying, to function at full capacity, regardless of what was happening inside, to hold things together for others before you checked whether you were holding together yourself. That was the expectation, not spoken out loud, not written down anywhere. Just there, consistently, reliably, as though it was simply who you were. Nobody told you that was too much, so you never knew it was. There is something the system never put a number on, what it cost you to keep showing up. The costs of functioning were invisible. The costs of not functioning were very visible, so you made the invisible choice over and over because it was the only one that did not have consequences you could see coming. You learned to absorb the weight without letting it show. You learned to keep the inside separate from the outside. You got very good at it. And the better you got at it, the more the system asked of you. Because nothing you showed suggested there was a limit. The pattern grew in that gap between what the system saw and what it never asked about. Here is something the system never gave you. A language for what you actually needed. the relief that was not available anywhere acceptable, the rest that never came because resting felt like failing, the space to feel something without being required to immediately manage it or move past it. Nobody offered that. Nobody named it as something you were allowed to ask for. So you found something else, something that worked, even imperfectly, even at a cost, because it was the only language available for something that had no other words. That is what happens when someone is handed a need with no language for it. The pattern was the only translation available. Some patterns were built for survival, not for a life, but they started as survival, and that matters. Part 4. Why it stays. Habits stay for a simple reason that is rarely said clearly. The trigger is still there. The conditions that made the pattern necessary have not changed enough. The pressure is still there, maybe in a different form. The dynamic is still there, maybe with different people. The feeling that made reaching for this thing feel like the only option, that feeling still arrives at the same times, still looks the same when it comes. The pattern did not stay because you are undisciplined. It stayed because what called for it never left. And beyond the trigger, there is something else. The pattern still does something. It might cost more than it used to. The relief might last less time, but it still delivers something, however briefly, however expensively. That is not weakness. That is the nervous system doing exactly what it does, returning to what has provided relief before. Understanding that does not mean the pattern is fine. It means it makes sense. And a pattern that makes sense is different from one that is simply a failure of will. There is one more thing keeping the pattern in place, and it is the heaviest one. The story. Not a story you invented. A story that was handed to you slowly over time by a system that kept showing you the same thing until you started believing it. That you are someone who cannot stop. That this is just who you are. That you have tried and failed often enough that the trying is the problem. This story did not come from you. It came from the accumulated weight of not being seen clearly, not being asked the right questions, not being given the language to understand what was actually happening. You did not write this story, you inherited it. The thing you cannot seem to stop doing was once the only thing that helped. It has not lost that logic yet. That is why it stays. Part 5. What this says about you. Whatever this pattern is for you, it is not a flaw. It is a response, a learned response to real conditions. Conditions that were often not fair, not adequate, designed with you in mind, conditions that asked more than they gave. You navigated them with what you had. The pattern was part of what you had. That does not make it cost nothing, but it changes what it says about you. It does not say you are someone who cannot manage yourself. It says you were someone who managed a system that was not managing you. There is a version of strength that no one applauds because it looks like a problem. The person who keeps functioning when everything inside them is running on empty. Who finds ways to get through the day when the day is asking more than any day should. Who reaches for what works, even imperfectly, even expensively, because the alternative was not functioning at all. It does not look like discipline from the outside. It often looks like exactly the thing you are ashamed of, but underneath it is something that deserves a different name than weakness. The name for it is survival. Imperfect, costly, human survival. I do not know what your pattern is. I do not know what it has cost you or what it kept at bay or how long you have been carrying both the pattern and the shame of it. But I know this. You were not broken when this started. Something around you was not working, and you found a way to keep working anyway. That is the honest version of the story. The pattern is not who you are. It is what you learned in conditions that never should have asked that of you. And if there is anything worth sitting with after this, it is not a plan or a technique or a method. It is just this. You were never the problem. You were the only one still trying to solve it. Closing. Looking at a pattern honestly takes something. Most people keep moving, keep managing, keep finding ways around the weight without ever setting it down long enough to ask where it came from. I have patterns too. Things I reach for when it gets quiet. Things I understand better now than I did, but have not left behind completely. I am in it too. Slowly, without a clear destination, and still here, same as you. If something in this stayed with you, write one word below. Not for me. For the person scrolling after you who has been carrying this quietly and never found a name for it.
I told myself this would be the last time, and for a while I believed it. The days went by, the distance grew, and I started thinking maybe I was finally free. But it never happens all at once. There is no moment you can point to, just a quiet evening, a little too much weight, and suddenly I'm standing here again. I know this yes, I know it well. I've had this conversation with myself so many times. That's the habit, that's the pull, that's the road that always knows my name. That's the habit, coming back again, looking like relief, we're in a different phase. That's the habit, the thing I swore I'd leave behind. And every time I think it's over, I find it waiting one more time. One more time. The strange thing is, it never felt like weakness, it felt like shelter. It felt familiar, like something that already knew what to do with the parts of me I couldn't carry anywhere else for years. I thought the habit was the problem, never asking why it was needed in the first place. I know this road, I know each turn, and part of me still remembers what it once solved. That's the habit, that's the pull, that's the road that always knows my name. That's the habit, coming back again, looking like relief, we're in a different phase. That's the habit, the thing I swore I'd leave behind. And every time I think it's over, I find it waiting one more time. You were there when nothing else was, you stayed when everything else left, long before the guilt, long before the shame. You were the answer to a question I didn't know how to ask, and maybe that's why letting go was never as simple as it sounds. That's the habit, that's the pull, that's the road that always knows my name. That's the habit, coming back again, looking like relief, we're in a different phase. That's the habit, the thing I swore I'd leave behind. And every time I think it's over, I find it waiting one more time. Maybe the habit was never the story. Maybe the story was everything that made it necessary.